What would happen to your business if your files were to disappear tomorrow? Would you be able to recover them, or would you be in trouble? Today, Dan and I talk about the tools needed to make sure that your business keeps running, even if the worst were to happen.
Before we really dive into
Yeah.
backups, right? I mean, I think we really have to define what is business continuity when we talk about backups. Business continuity is
Yeah.
is more or less the entire program that goes from backups to recovery, retention. We can get into the weeds on RTO or RPO,
Mm-hmm.
right? The amount of time that you are okay losing a data. You could lose up to an hour's data, 5 hours data, a day's data,
Yeah.
or and how long you want it to take to recover. You have to define what's important
Your
to.
backup will change depending on
Absolutely, yeah.
what you're willing to do with that
Yeah, if your risk
continuity
tolerance
and
is
yeah.
high, if you're good with being down for an entire day, or you're good with losing an entire day's worth of data churn,
Yeah.
because then your
Which there
backups
might be
change.
some businesses that might be okay with that, right? Some that don't rely on massive amounts of data coming through and tracking everything, they might be okay with that.
Correct. Yeah. If
But
they if
yeah.
they if they if somebody does a few changes in a spreadsheet per day and they have that logged somewhere else, right? They did
Yeah.
it from, I don't know, some kind of time card, like manual time cards or something like that, and
Mhm.
they put it into a spreadsheet once a day. Then great. That might be their kind of risk tolerance. So I think when it
Yeah.
when it comes to backups, what's important is to really define all of those pieces before you choose a solution. I think a lot of organizations choose a solution because somebody said so, or because the first Google search they came across told them that, and
Selling them something big and yeah.
or they think, well, it's not that important, hey, you know what, it might not be,
Yeah.
but we have to at least evaluate the importance of it, which some of that is just going through the process of really kind of designing a true BCDR plan for an organization that takes into account other factors.
Yeah.
Factors like you have how much data churn you have, what's your recovery time, and then also evaluate your downtime. What's it cost your
Well, I was gonna say,
organization to be
what's the
down?
impact, right? That's
Yeah.
one of the important questions to ask
Yeah.
is
I mean, if
yeah.
you have 20 employees at $20 an hour, that's $400 an hour. If they can't work for an hour, that starts getting expensive pretty quick.
Yep. Yeah.
And keeping in mind that you also lost the hour before. If your RTO was an hour,
Mhm.
you've now lost an hour plus an hour to recover it from that point of loss.
Yep.
So now you're at 2 hours, which is now $800 in
Yeah.
that 2 hours of loss. And that's just in wages. That's not in potential other revenue that you could have generated in that time for some other capacity, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you've lost another $400, another hour's worth by the time you account for the fact that nobody was calling clients, or nobody was selling, or nobody was, I don't know, seeing patients, whatever the
Yeah.
the business is, right? So it actually becomes pretty expensive pretty quickly to be down.
Yeah.
That's why it's pretty expensive overall to just have a business.
Yeah.
And so yeah, nobody, I think, really truly just defining that business continuity and disaster recovery component.
Yeah.
I think BCDR is thrown around, backups are thrown around, and backups are a portion of that.
Yeah, your backups. So what you're saying is if you're choosing your backups, you first have to define what your BCDR plan is, right? You know what your whole plan is, and then the backups are a portion of that to make sure that your business continues to
Exactly.
run as you're comfortable with. And
Exactly.
yeah,
The backups are just the first, are just one of the pieces, that kind of the tactical execution
yeah,
elements there, because it's it's arguably just as or more important how you recover those backups,
yeah,
right? You could copy all the files to a flash drive every 5 minutes, but if you don't have a way to recover it easily,
hmm
it doesn't matter that you had 5 minutes of RTO, or your kind of recovery point objective, rather, sorry, your
yeah,
RPO. You had every 5 minutes you had a backup. That's great. It means you might lose 5 minutes of data, but it might take you a year to recover from that. Not
yeah.
really, but you know what I mean? Like, if
No, but it could take if it takes you a week, then the week is actually what's costing you, not the 5 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
the
so
snapshot. Yeah,
how you kind of define that and break that down is really important.
yeah,
I think you have to look at, okay,
hmm
I'm good with losing an hour of data. That's pretty common.
yeah,
We'll do backups every hour.
hmm
And then you have to say, okay, so that means the most I could lose is an hour of work.
yeah,
Uh, Probably not that large of an issue in most organizations. But then you have to think about how fast do I want to be recovered?
Yeah.
How long do I go from being down to being back up and operational? And that doesn't mean fully operational. It doesn't mean 100% capacity, but that means I want to be most of the way there. And
Yeah.
how long does that take? And that's where you start getting into, is that where we start doing, hot spare servers? Is that where we start using business continuity appliances? Is that where we start using things that can boot an image very quickly, products
Yeah.
like that? That's where you start looking at that. I mean, personally, in the small to medium business segment, those BCDR appliances are lifesavers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they handle the backup component of it, the data backups. They handle the kind of warm spare component typically, but then they also handle the cloud offsite for long term, the
Mhm.
long term kind of Alamo, if you will, get that data offsite and get encrypted offsite.
Yeah.
They kind of handle all phases of that without even thinking about it.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the backups are that's almost like the last offense, right? If what would cause you to even get into your backups? Your something gets past all of your security, your antivirus, everything else, right? It gets through the first lines of defense, and then your backup plan is the last line of defense to protect your business.
So they call it the backup plan.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
no,
That's a
it's
good
aptly
point.
named. But no, yes, but honestly, backups they're more than that. They also you they also help with negligence, inadvertent
Hmm.
or intentional. If you had an employee who's going through and say deleting emails, or if you had an employee who accidentally deleted something,
Yeah,
if you don't have backups, it's really hard to recover from that. And that's
or
honestly a
a
lot of times.
disgruntled employee who is leaving, right, and
And
wants to cause max damage on the way out. You
right.
can,
Yeah,
yeah,
and so backups actually they actually arguably they're more important
yeah.
for non-malware type offenses than they
Than they are
are
for that,
than I mean,
yeah,
yes, don't get me wrong. If you have good backups, image-based backups, things like that,
yeah,
it's a lot easier to recover from ransomware or
yeah,
from other types of circumstances. Um, but arguably they're used more in day to day.
yeah,
Oh, someone in accounting deleted this spreadsheet they've spent the last 6 months editing
mhm,
off and on, right? And it's gone. They can't find it anywhere. Well, they knew they had it on Tuesday at 2 p.m. is the last time they made an edit. So if you took backups every hour,
yeah, so let's go look at that,
we'll
and it's
find it,
there, yeah,
right? And so that's the bigger issue with a lot of those
yeah,
systems, is like actually going to get a file.
yeah,
Then there's the other piece, which is like hardware failure.
mhm,
That's a big another big component. When you have that warm spare, if you will, that image based warm spare backup solution, if you lose a server, Windows update and server reboots, it decides it's going to take a dirt nap,
mm,
whatever, right?
yeah,
Like it happens,
yeah,
unfortunately, and you can quickly spin up that backup
yeah,
and get yourself back and operational in minutes from that standpoint. Versus, what would it take right now? Just think about it. We have this very nice Dell server. It died. Let's say
yeah,
it's under warranty with Premier support or something like that.
yeah,
It's 2 in the afternoon. You're not getting a Dell Tech today.
yeah,
Tomorrow morning they may be there. So now you're down
yeah, on
all afternoon.
3 hours plus the next morning, however long it takes for them to
Exactly, and
fix,
for them
yeah,
to actually fix it,
so,
what if they can't get the parts?
mhm,
We've seen shortages of parts. Heaven
yep,
forbid it was RAM that died, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
it's gonna cost you $3,000
the Brinks truck will have to show up
yeah,
to make sure you can, actually secure the RAM, but, so if something like that happens, you don't wanna be down half a day, but you could be
yeah.
back up and running in a few minutes.
Well, that's like in a few minutes, your employees might not even notice that to a certain degree, right? Like I was
They'd notice, right? Because it's gonna go down and come back up,
I
but
guess it would.
if
It
they're
depends on what
actively
they're doing,
working.
yeah, if they're yeah.
But by the time they get back from a coffee break, we're good.
Now it's back
Now
up.
we're good.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
they had a quick bathroom break, a walk around the building, get a little fresh air, and next thing
Yep.
you know, they're ready to go.
Because I was talking to a, potential client who they reached out and, he told me that, he built his server, himself, right? So there's no warranty on it. He kinda cobbled it together from other servers. He's technical enough that he could do that, and that's what his business is running off of. And when I asked him his backup, he says, "Well, I plug this hard drive in once every month." and take an image.
I assume using Windows image backup.
I'm guessing so.
So
Yeah, he didn't know
good
we didn't get into
luck.
details of it, right? But I
Good
asked him, I said, "Do you know what
luck.
the impact would be if your server were to fail?" And all he could say is, "I'm sure not good."
Oh, that's fair.
Right? But
I-
give me an idea, right? What is,
um,
using our method of backups, right? You're only down for a couple minutes versus that situation. Paint
it
me a picture of the difference.
So um, generally speaking, recovery from Windows image backup is not really. It's really kind of like it's like system restore points. Really, that's kind of what
Mhm.
it is. If you just had to roll back to yesterday's version, no, not as big of a deal. But if you actually had to do like a full bare metal restore type thing, it not a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
You'd have to get a new server first.
Yeah, you had to
What
pay
if
for the
it's not
server.
compatible? So when you
Yeah.
start using stuff like that, it's better now, don't get me
Yep.
wrong. It's better now than it was, but stuff like if you're going, Windows backup, it's yeah, no, it wouldn't be a
Yeah.
fun process. I mean, you're talking a day or two. USB drive, think about it. Just say, I mean, just do the math. You get a couple hundred megabytes per second at most off a USB drive.
Yep.
So just the time to take 5 terabytes off of a USB drive over to a new piece of hardware is ridiculous. It's at least a couple hours anyway.
Mhm.
And maybe 300, I don't know how many megabytes per hour
Yeah,
is that?
yeah.
1.8 terabytes per hour. So it take you 3 or 4 hours just to
Just to transfer the
transfer
data.
data.
Yeah.
And that's not even to restore it really.
Yeah. It's just
And
to get
then
it into the
and
machine, right?
that's theoretical. That's
Yeah.
not actual. That's,
Yeah.
hey, that's how it could be. So, you're it's just a long recovery
So
process for something like that.
basically, you're buying another server, then you're spending half a day getting the stuff in there, then
And
you're
then letting
spending
it
however
run.
much more time configuring it to get onto the server, and then
Be
you're
a
only
lot of
working
work.
off of depending on when's the last time you had plugged that in, it could
Exactly.
have a month-old data, so you're
Well, and it was probably a month ago by the time you've done all this.
well,
And so now you're 2 months old or 3 months
there you go,
old, and
yeah,
so
so
yeah,
yeah,
no, yeah, I wouldn't do that.
yep,
I wouldn't do that. It's one thing if you're just doing file backups and you're
yep,
completely content on, hey, file backups are great. If you're doing just file backups, I'd still automate it. That whole manual USB process,
right,
not a good idea just from
yeah,
the standpoint of, you've got
but
to
as I
plug the drive in.
understand
You got to
it,
remember to do it.
they have automated machines that, run off of the server, which means the machines will go down, right, if the server goes down,
I don't know about who you're talking about, but yeah, it could.
but they do.
So they have
That's what
virtual
you do.
machines, you mean, or they have third like
They have
ancillary
machine
devices that use that server? Yeah,
exactly. The server hosts
some
the
kind of
machines that they do work with, so the
oh,
machines would not be
yeah.
functional.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
That'd be tough to recover from.
yeah,
It wouldn't be ideal. Like it can work.
yeah.
It obviously can work. I mean, they wouldn't put it out there if it didn't work. It's just not ideal. It's like that
It's
makes
just
you feel
it's
better.
higher risk, is
Oh,
what you're saying.
extremely high
It's
risk.
higher
Yeah,
risk.
for sure.
Yeah,
I think there's definitely better products for that type of
yeah.
and when you have those types of those interdependencies built into a solution or to an environment, you
Yeah.
really have to keep in mind those dependencies and your
Mhm.
reliance on them. If
Yeah.
if you do have an issue, if, depending on what the automated machine is, if it's something they need to do their work,
Mhm.
then they have to have a plan to
Yeah.
to recover it. If their plan is to try to recover from a Windows backup and reset up everything else and wait for new hardware, if they can afford that amount of downtime, okay. Most businesses
Yeah, I was
can't.
gonna say, what business can afford a month of downtime? So tell me about this, Dan, because I was talking to somebody about their backups, right? And to understand backups more, I went and started reading CVEs. Can you explain to me what those are and how they, differ from backup solution to backup solution?
A CVE?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so a critical vulnerability would be a CVE.
yeah,
It really is kind of the standardized way to measure the risk of a specific backup or product, not backup product, any
yeah, yeah,
product, right? All kinds of products have
yeah.
CVEs. I mean, I'm sure iMessage has a CVE, and this has a
Mm,
CVE. There tons of stuff has CVEs.
yeah,
Every software out there, so it's just really a way to measure, the risk, or maybe kind of make that announcement of, hey, there's this. CVEs don't really measure the risk per se. That's going to be the CVSS, but
mhm,
um, it's really kind of making the announcement that this software has a vulnerability, and then the
yeah,
CVSS score correlates to the actual risk for using that software, at least in its unpatched state.
yeah.
So I mean, yeah, when it comes to backup products, right? That a lot of them are going to have CVEs, right? They're
Mhm.
software.
Yeah.
CVEs exist in all kinds of software.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is, but it's just a matter of where do those CVEs come into play? What is actually the risk?
Yeah.
And then, what's your risk tolerance for that?
Well, how does that work with okay, so what I looked up, right? We use Slide.
Mhm,
We use Datto.
mhm.
Um, and I was comparing it to Veeam. And when I looked at the CVEs, Veeam had
Makes you want to cry.
70, 76, 78, something like that.
Mhm.
Half of them were high and critical compared to Datto, which had 6, and Slide, which didn't have any. Right. So, looking at that, what does it mean for your backup to have a critical vulnerability? Does that mean your backup now becomes a door into your network? The thing that's supposed to protect you and save your business now is what is
You have to
introducing the ransomware?
you have to look at those a little bit with take a CVE with a grain of salt because
Sure.
a CVE is typically issued for a specific product, but
Yeah.
also a specific function and a lot of times a specific version or minor version.
Okay.
Almost always a CVE gets published, there's already a fix for that
Okay.
specific CVE.
Yeah.
So it might be if you look at the fine print there, you might see this affects version 1.10115 and
Mm.
below. This is
So you
patched
have to
in
be
1.
patching it
You need to be
throughout. Yeah.
constantly maintaining it. So
Yeah.
like a product like Veeam, like you mentioned, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's also extremely easy to get.
Yeah.
You can right now you can go to Veeam's website and download Veeam. I
Yeah.
mean, not as a not for at a high level, but they have a free community version.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they have so many different versions of products, which also makes a big difference.
Mhm.
When you have more products, you have more attack surface. But also the ease of use, it obviously becomes manipulated more. When you
Yeah.
asked about is it a backdoor into your network, it can be, but generally that isn't really the case. Generally, the case is they're like for instance, Veeam Wiper is a thing
Mhm.
that's been around for a while, and that's one of those CVEs, or probably more than one, to be honest, because it required kind of a little bit of a chained attack. Not really. You already
Yeah.
had to have access to the Veeam server, but once you got it, game over.
Then yeah.
Um, and Veeam is typically integrated into a Windows network. It's usually domain joined, meaning
Mhm.
credentials that work on other servers work on it. Well, that means that
Yeah.
it's exposed to a lot more risk and then other solutions might be. And so yeah, from a CVE standpoint, every product will have a CVE at some point
Mhm.
probably, but it's a matter of what is that CVE.
Yeah.
Is it just poor coding practice, a little small mistake? Is it a buffer overflow or something like
Mhm.
that just causes uh, inconvenience, or is
Yep.
it something that could
Or is
be
something critical.
leveraged like a
Yeah.
Veeam wiper where they can kind of
Yeah.
worm their way into the Veeam server and wipe out your backups before they give you
Yeah.
ransomware, that kind of stuff.
So basically what you're saying is if you have there's different products out there, different backup products out there. Some cost more, some cost less. Something like Veeam is going to cost less than something like a Datto or a Slide. And if you were to use it, you just have to really stay on top of it, right?
Um,
Stay on top of the
cost
patching. Yeah.
cost is probably subjective there.
Okay.
There's a lot of factors that come into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go get a free version of Veeam and back up your servers and
Mhm.
virtual machines.
Yeah.
Um, and Bob's your uncle, and it could work amazingly for you.
Yeah.
You stay on top of it. But it also but you're not going to have it's gonna be much more piecemealed,
Mhm.
right? So you're gonna be like, "Okay, I'm gonna go get Veeam," and let's assume you bought Veeam.
Yeah.
You didn't go get the
You
free
didn't get the
version.
free, but you
Let's
paid
go
money
talk
for it.
about because
Yeah.
I think I don't know the licensing restrictions on Veeam for the free version.
Yeah.
For businesses, it might not even be able to be used for business. I think it's kind of like
It's more of a
personal
consumer kind of
workload.
stuff. Yeah.
But I assume some are using the
Yeah.
free version of Veeam. But let's assume you bought a license for Veeam. Well, you already bought the license,
Yeah.
so you paid for that. Probably on an annual commitment or something like that, or per workload. Just depends on what licensing
Mhm.
arrangement you go
Yeah.
with. Well, now you have to go buy hardware to run it on. So Veeam can operate really similarly to another BCDR type appliance. Slide, Datto, etc. Um, with some key caveat
Yeah.
differences, but they can operate very similarly, but they require you to go out and buy another Dell server that you can run it on, right? So then you move
Mhm.
your images over there so that they're kind of operating the same one. Well, now you just bought a Dell server. That's not
Yeah.
cheap. Doesn't have to be Dell, another server.
Yeah.
You have to maintain it.
Mhm.
You have to set up your own and pay your own offsite backup storage fees. Arguably, you might be able to get it cheaper than some other products, but you have
Yeah.
to go secure an S3 bucket.
Yeah.
Guess what happened? Guess where every data breach that's occurred, like in recent memory, as big one has happened? It's because somebody didn't secure an S3 bucket. There's several of them out there. Not
Yeah.
not everyone, but a lot of them occur when you don't secure your cloud storage environment.
Yeah.
Well, now you're responsible to go secure that cloud storage environment, to rotate the keys, to make sure the data is there,
Yeah.
to pay the AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or whoever bill. So there's just a lot more maintenance that's required.
Mhm.
Plus, you have the continuous threat of, hey, this software is publicly found on the internet, so people
So they can
download it
know,
and try
yeah.
to test it and try to
Yeah.
break into it,
Go find the loopholes.
which
Yeah,
as long
before they
as you're
publish.
constantly
Yeah.
updating and you're very diligent on it, yeah, you might
Yeah.
you can build a good platform there, but it requires a lot of work.
So you're almost saying the cost of Veeam is not just in money, but in time and headache and
Potentially.
what you know
Yeah,
the human component of needing to actually go maintain it and stuff, and
exactly.
that introduces the option for human error because if
Correct. Yeah.
generally speaking, humans are the ones who cause problems within
Well, yeah,
technology, right?
like it'll take good backups. Plenty of
Yeah,
organizations use Veeam. I've recovered servers from Veeam before. It's
yeah,
it's not a big deal. But the issue is there's a lot more risk. If it's not a set it and forget it type option. How about
yeah,
that? So for a small
yeah.
to medium business sector, it's not exactly great.
Hmm.
Require a lot of maintenance. It can
Yeah,
it can take it's just different.
yeah,
Now there are some options out there. Once again, these are paid options. These aren't free Veeams, so
yeah.
keep that in mind. I could even tell you what those cost. But Veeam also has a hardened Linux like agent box now that you can get, or
Hmm.
VM that you can get, I think, and so that's a little bit less susceptible to some of the other risk. But overall, it's not as clear cut. Oh, this is cheaper. It might look cheaper. It might be a little bit cheaper,
Yeah,
but it may not be better
yeah.
because it's not, there's so many more things. So what happens if there's if that bucket goes offline in S3 and you didn't realize it, or your
Yeah.
Veeam server isn't set up to send you email alerts um because it couldn't connect to your email server, or the password expired and the
Mhm.
SMTP, or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that can break on it.
Yeah. Well, tell me about Slide then, because when we were talking about Veeam, and we don't use Veeam right here at
We don't.
Technologize. We use Slide and we use Datto, but
We
and tell
use
me tell me the difference.
it.
Why do we use Slide?
Well, I mean, you kind of have to go back in time a little bit there, but BCDR appliances are
Mhm.
just the way to go for the small to medium business thing, because
Yeah.
it's not justifiable in large enterprise. It doesn't make sense, right? it,
Yeah.
it gets cost prohibitive. They can afford to have spare servers and redundancies and
Yeah.
a whole
Large enterprise is
team.
completely different than the
Yeah,
space that we're
so
in.
for
Yeah.
small to medium business though, like, it's not worth it to have two servers
Yeah.
that are high cost machines,
Yeah.
20, 30 grand every 5 years per server. So now we're talking 50 grand in
Mhm.
hardware, and there's a 95% likelihood, 90% likelihood that you never use the second piece of hardware. It just ages out,
Yeah.
or you leverage 10% of it for some
Mhm.
random function because you had it. And so these other BCR appliance companies, a Slide or a Datto or whatever,
Yeah.
they let you have the security blanket of that second piece of hardware, because it is a second piece of hardware.
Yeah, it's physically there,
It's
right?
physically there
Yeah.
without having to pay the same price as that second piece of hardware.
Mhm.
And that's the bigger issue, is that
Yeah.
it's going to be a cheaper piece of hardware, still adequate for short-term needs, but it's really designed to be kind of that encrypted storage vault. It's you're going to store backups here. This machine is going to
Mhm.
process these backups. It's going to work through your snapshots and
Yeah.
all the stuff you have set up. It's then going to offsite it, get it offsite, get it encrypted
Yeah.
somewhere else outside of the data center, with the added bonus, one bill. It's all done for you. You
It's
don't
all
have to
right.
worry about
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about, how did I encrypt that? Or did I set up that S3 bucket right? Did my brand new tech do it
That's all
according to
taken care of,
policy?
yeah.
It's already done.
Yeah.
And you also have a little bit of security through obscurity.
Yeah.
Veeam typically, generally, runs on Windows. You go
Mhm.
down the Windows installer and you install it on Windows and you install it on a Windows server, and that's your new backup server. It
Yeah.
handles everything, which is cool. But these appliances all run on, custom Linux distributions, or they're probably some variation of
Mhm.
Ubuntu or something, but they run on Linux distributions with potentially with hardened kernels, with
Mhm.
things that are just a little bit harder, with less attack surface.
Yeah.
With Veeam, you have the attack surface of Veeam. You also have the attack surface of Windows, which, as we know, is not small. Well, a hardened Linux application or hardened Linux kernel has a lot less attack surface, generally speaking.
Yeah.
If somebody installed a BitTorrent client on this server,
Yeah.
well, now you have another attack surface.
Yeah.
That can't happen over here. Can't be done. At least not
Yeah.
easily, right? And so that bringing it all into one,
Mhm.
it gives you a lot of confidence in the product.
Yeah.
And then not having to manage every bit and piece. Yes, you still manage it. Yes, you still have to maintain that system. You have to make sure backups are occurring, but you simplify how that works.
Yeah.
Because to you at that point, it's like, okay, I got this guy, my little Alamo box. If this server dies, if I need to recover a file, I can go straight to this, grab it off it, drop it
It's
where it
right
needs to go,
there.
and we're good.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about, did it take the backups?
Yeah.
I already know it took the backups. I don't have to worry about, did it get the backups to the cloud? It
Yeah.
got the backups to the cloud. It was all built in.
So basically, this is the take the human component out of it, take the headache out of it, and put in high quality. The way you're saying it almost kind of sounds like to me like a fifth wheel on like a Jeep or something, right? Right. If something goes down, you could just put it in something that honestly acts almost. It's not ideal. You don't want to. You want to make sure that you get your tire fixed, right? But it will keep your business running the same as if
I mean,
your server was still
we've
there.
gotten it. Uh we've used it ourselves.
Yeah.
We had a failure of whatever. It wasn't even hardware failure, it was
Yeah.
software failure, I think. Recovered to it and ran on it fine with no impact operations for a
Yep.
month while we got
Well,
it
go
fixed,
fixed it.
right?
Yeah.
We've had clients as recently as a few months ago that did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Those products are much simpler to set up, and that's the
Yeah.
other thing, is that when you simplify it, it makes it easier, obviously.
Yeah.
But it makes
Well,
it
then
easier
you
to
don't have
pay
to.
for it, because you can simplify it, and it's like,
Yeah.
this is my backup box.
Yeah.
And if this thing dies, no big deal. I got another backup box.
Yeah.
But there is a component that is not really talked about either. And we didn't even mention in the Veeam side of it, which is the cloud restore component.
Mhm.
Typically, almost all those BCDR type appliances, Slide and Datto, are
Yeah.
definitely included in that group. They have cloud restores, and I don't mean like cloud data restores, go get your data from the cloud. I mean cloud virtual machines that you can
Yeah.
link up to your main site.
Oh, okay.
So you lost your your building burned down,
Yeah.
you lost your slide box that was there, you lost your server that was there,
Yeah.
and you go and you want to work from home, you could create a VPN to the slide cloud with a hosted VM up
And
there.
it's still there.
It's still there, just like you were
Yeah.
in your office. A little bit, obviously, a little more complex, but
Yeah.
you could do it just like you were in your office.
Yeah.
And that's really where the benefit
Yeah.
is that if all of this goes sideways, you can access your data by the time you get home.
So you almost
Um,
have normal business operations, backup, and then a backup of that backup too if
yeah.
something really goes sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a big piece of it. Now with Veeam, you can do something similar, right?
Mhm.
You can boot your backups in an AWS or an S3 cloud or whatever, right? You effectively, but you have to manage a lot of chunks of that. Now you got to
Yeah.
pay AWS for compute
Yeah.
or whatever. And
So
once
you're
again,
throwing more cost and more configuration and human touches into
you
it.
have to touch
Yeah.
it, right? You have to convert that. And I think
Yeah.
actually Veeam, to give them credit, I think the paid Veeam versions give you the option to like configure all that within
Configure it.
Veeam. So it
Yeah.
more or less can kind of work itself. But
Yep.
what if you configured it wrong and now your
Mhm.
VLANs don't line up or
Yeah.
something, and now you can't
And
connect?
you don't know if it's wrong until something
So
goes sideways,
yeah.
and then you find out, "Oh, wait, this wasn't done right in the first
Versus
place, and I'm out of business for however long."
the snapshot ones that they send you daily or nightly or
Yeah,
whatever reports, you can see it every single day. Hey,
yeah,
this thing booted. Look at the pretty Windows login screen,
yeah.
that kind of stuff. And so,
Oh, yeah, you
um,
showed me that once. You to demonstrate it to me, you opened up, an image, and you said, "Yep, here it is. Here's the"
Yeah,
You
it
can
just it's pretty neat and it's
yeah,
quick. It's much faster.
yeah,
Veeam restores are not. I'm not gonna say they're not necessarily slow. They're definitely faster than that Windows image backup
yeah.
restore we talked about. But but I'm something like Slide. Slide is even faster than Datto, for instance. I mean,
Yeah,
the slides like they boot fast.
yeah.
That's pretty impressive actually how fast they go. They go from nothing to
Mhm.
restore created and booted in 2-3 minutes.
Yeah,
Usually, it's pretty fast.
yeah. So, bringing this full circle then, right, with the BCDR that you were talking about at the beginning, establishing that whether you slide, whether you use data, whether you use Veeam, whether you use Windows Restore, is that what you said,
Well, that
right?
was Windows image backup.
Windows
Yeah.
image backup, right? It's just I don't want to call it a hierarchy, right? But depending on your risk tolerance and the headache that you want to incur in case something goes wrong, right? You're going to choose backups based off of that, right? I would assume most business owners would say, yeah, give me
You
give
want
me
your
the
backups to
solution
work.
that doesn't yeah, that doesn't put my business at risk, and then you're going into the higher tier kind of backups,
Y-
right?
y-
But
at the end of the day, you want your backups to work. That's
yeah,
that's something that you have to have working.
yeah.
Because if a disaster, if a ransomware, if a name it
Mhm.
occurs and you don't have working backups,
That's your business
it's
right
a
there.
long day.
Yeah.
It's a real long day. It's a real long week. It's a real long month.
Yeah.
It's a real long year and likely puts you out of business, right?
And that sets you back for, if you lose, a month or 2 of work, in February, you could be feeling that effect in November, December, January, right? February the next year. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
you'll feel it for ages, and
Yeah.
you'll always remember. Now, I bet you have good backups after that. But,
Well, we've had that, right? We've had clients come to us and say, "We've had these problems. Yeah, let's set it up right now the second time." After you've paid the 100 grand of ransomware, after you've paid all of that and gotten rid of the bad
yeah, and I
backups.
and I think it's hard to say that that's, the only defense, right?
Yeah.
Backups are kinda like you said, the last line of defense of in a way,
Yeah.
and backups is used synonymously with BCDR even though they are different, right? BCDR is kind of the whole 50,000-foot view of
Mhm.
how this works
Yeah.
versus backups, which are just one little piece.
Yep.
A big
Yeah.
piece, but
An
a
important piece.
piece,
Yeah.
just a piece of that plan, and it's
Yeah.
like because backups are great, but what do you do with those backups?
Yeah.
Do you just take them and then put them in a safe somewhere? Like you
Yeah,
take
you're
them on a
like,
USB
"They're in
drive,
the
put them in a
computer."
safe,
Yeah.
and you don't know how to use them. You're like, oh, I
Yeah.
have this backup, but I don't know how to use it. And so part of that BCR plan is testing those backups,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what these appliances generally do for you as well. That's how they boot the image. They make sure it's good.
Yeah.
Some of them will check ransomware verification and things like
Mhm.
that. They want to make sure there's no obvious signs of ransomware on the system. So it's very
Yeah.
it's a big piece, but honestly, most businesses are definitely better served with a backup appliance. It
Yeah.
just simplifies their life.
Simplifies their life and keeps them safe.
Mhm.
Okay. So, question for you then, Dan, based off this conversation that we've been having, why would MSPs are generally the ones that are putting these backups into place, right? And they're telling their clients, "Hey, we got your backups taken care of," right? We might even charge for backups, not saying what kind of backups they are, right? And that's the bill a client pays. So why would an MSP go with a cheaper option rather than a premium option?
I mean, why would anyone go with a cheaper option rather than premium option in anything? Because they feel like it's not important, or maybe
Yeah,
they feel that good is good enough, or just being there is good enough.
yeah,
Not taking into account the fact that they might have to recover from these. That
yeah.
they're kind of checking a box.
Mhm.
It's one of those things where a lot of MSPs will just check boxes. A client
Yeah,
wants backups. We're going to look for the cheapest backup so that we can either maximize profit, or MSPs are also notorious at not pricing services adequately.
yeah,
And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll be like, well, this is cheap, so we'll use this. And it generally might do the job.
mhm,
Maybe they haven't recovered from it. Maybe they don't care. I don't want to say care, that's not fair, but
yeah,
maybe it's not top of mind for them what the recovery would look like if they do it. They just say, you know
yeah,
what, if we get to that point, then we'll deal with it. Um I yeah,
yeah,
why it's kind of one of those things where you have to select the right tool for the job.
yeah,
Could you uh, could you build a house with I don't know, old school implement, sure.
Yeah.
May take longer,
Yep.
may not look as good, but it might work. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Oh, it'll
probably can
be a
get it
roof over your
done.
head. Yeah.
Yeah, you can probably get something done. It may not be as nice as some custom perfect tool for every task, but
Yep.
it might still work. And that's, I think, where some people skimp on backups because it's something that's not.
Tangible. Not
Yeah, I
something
was
to
gonna.
see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not as tangible. You don't see it as much.
Yeah.
And it's hard to justify that insurance price, right? I mean, every
Yeah.
time you pay your car insurance, how do you feel about it? Yeah, exactly. Or
That's
when your
annoying. Yeah.
homeowners goes up,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's true.
yeah, 2 weeks from now, right?
Yeah.
But whenever you pay for that insurance, it's kind of hard pill to swallow. Even though one
Yeah.
day you may be very thankful you have
Until
it.
I've used insurance once, and I
Mm,
actually was glad that I had the insurance that I
exactly.
did when I needed it. I was frustrated for the 7 years before I used it, but
Exactly, and
it took
so,
care of me. Yeah.
so it's one of those things. It's
Yeah.
hard to justify,
Yeah.
but when you need it, turns out it's easy to
Mhm.
justify, and
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest reason is that a lot of MSPs probably don't put as much of an emphasis on it as we generally would because or they should because it's an expense. It can be a big expense,
Yeah.
backups aren't it can
Well, especially if you go for the big ones. We have a client that's using an 8 terabyte, and, well, that costs a lot
yeah,
more than
we
a single terabyte of
we've had triple
backups.
those and
Yeah.
and bigger, and so, yeah, no, it definitely is it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough for people to justify that expense. It's hard to sell it upstream,
Yeah.
but it's a worthwhile expense.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me this. Let's say I'm a business owner and I'm using MSP, and I'm paying for backups, and I watch this and I say, well, I wonder what kind of backups my business is running off of, because ABC Tech Company is the one who's doing my IT work. How do I know? How do I check that? How do I verify that they're not cheaping out on backups and that my business is actually protected and safe?
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is ask.
Yeah.
Ask. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Well,
it
I mean,
the company did the,
okay, tech company. What are my backups? Don't worry, I got you covered. I might hear that. What do I? No, no, no. What do I see? What do I want to hear?
yeah,
How
I
do I
think
check
that
this?
I think you still ask. If
Yeah,
you get some kind of rudiment or like roundabout answer like that, you already got your answer.
yeah, sure.
If you had to, if you don't get a definitive answer, oh, it's this product or it's this,
Yeah,
or at least something along the lines of like it's image based backup or things like that.
yeah,
If they can't give you specifics, maybe it's some homebrewed solution you want to stay away from. But
yeah.
but really, if you get a roundabout answer, most MSPs are generally pretty the products that we use
Hmm.
are generally pretty good, right? And
Yeah,
so, and frankly, a lot of MSPs use similar products.
yeah,
So you can pretty quickly determine if you're getting a kind of a roundabout answer, or you can't get a real answer from somebody,
yeah.
then you've got your answer.
Well, is there something that we could produce with a premium product that shows, hey, here's how you're protected. See it booted up. Here's all the successful, markers and milestones and green flags of things are protected, versus a lower cost one that says, yeah, wink, wink, you're good. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, absolutely. I think also like all the appliances, they produce reports and
they
everything
do.
else that show that hey, backups were successful, and
Yeah,
94 backups in a row were successful. And sometimes you'll get a transient failure, right? If
yeah,
if Windows was doing updates in the middle of a backup process, I
hmm,
mean that's going to happen.
yeah,
But generally, you get all of that data with
yeah.
all of those appliances, and
But
you
if
can
it's
get
doing it every hour, okay, one out of 24,
yeah,
you know,
it's
might have gotten interrupted, but
and those ones are always the ones that occur at midnight or 2 a.m. Right? Windows
yes, yeah.
updates is rebooting the server, and so you can't take a
Mhm.
backup.
So the backup at 2 a.m. is the same. That's the ones at midnight,
And it's
usually.
probably at 6 p.m., at 7
Yes.
PM, and 8 PM, and 9 PM. So on
Yeah,
those ones are not as important
yeah.
overall. So yeah, they produce reports. They usually
Mhm.
they do testing. That's the other big thing
Yeah,
is so many companies fail on backup testing.
yeah,
So when you create a backup, you part of that BCDR
yeah,
is testing the backups. How do you know
yeah.
they work? And those appliances give you ways to test them. Slide,
Mhm.
they test them for you.
Well, and that testing's important, especially depending on the industry you're in, because I've been looking at, regulations for credit unions, and I've been looking at regulations for accounting firms, and, if you're touching money or if you're touching personal data, or if you're touching important stuff like that, I believe I saw it in, IRS publications and in FTC regulations that you have to test your backups. So if that's not being done, then you could have a compliance issue at that point too, not just a business risk.
Yeah, it's kind of that whole inspect what you expect kind of
Yeah.
situation. Obviously, when you start talking about compliance, then it becomes a matter of actually documenting that they were tested,
Yes.
or of documenting a review of the testing. So automated testing is generally fine.
Mhm.
Those compliances, though, are more, they want you to test your entire DR policy, right? And
Sure.
so your
Yeah.
procedure, how do you recover?
Mhm.
How do you recover? And this simplifies that, because if you
Yeah.
had Veeam, how do you test that really? I mean, yeah, you do a restore to another server, to a VM on the same
Mhm.
server. Do you have the capacity for it? Do you have the planning for it? Are you going to run on it? Are you just testing it to make sure it functions?
Yeah.
Versus something like this, which you could isolate, right? You on a slide, you could boot it up and put that thing
Mhm.
in an isolated VLAN. Put one workstation in an isolated VLAN with the backup. Make sure
And then
you can
yeah,
get transaction
and then
data.
press
You're
go, and
good,
then, yep, it
and
worked.
you can do
Yeah.
a full DR test in a box, if you will, pretty
Yeah.
quickly versus like an old school, like, oh, we got to boot up now. We got to add yeah, you
Yeah.
could do it. You can add a VLAN trunk and add VLAN to the switch and into the VM and do all that. But
Once again, more manual touches then. You have to touch it again and again and again.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's instead of it just being, hey, one computer did it, VLAN 99, VLAN 99. Oh, look,
Yep.
it works.
It works,
And
yeah.
nobody else is down in that time period
Yeah.
either. So there's a lot more to it. Obviously, when we start talking about DR planning and DR testing and things like that, but more or less, um, simple, complex. When
Yeah.
it's simple, it keeps it easy and it means that things
Yeah.
will likely get done.
Mhm.
When becomes more complex, it might get done, but it's going
Yeah.
to require significantly more oversight, significantly more time, and potential for human error. Plus, what
Yeah.
if you had a guy who was doing all the backups and documenting that he was doing all the backups, and then you find
And
out,
you got hit by a bus.
or he wasn't doing it?
Oh, it's true.
You
Mine
know
was
what I
darker,
mean?
but yes, the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
consequence.
same consequence. He dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, this got dark.
Yeah.
Now we are part of the mob. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that gives you documented
Yeah.
proof from from a effectively a neutral party, a system saying,
Yeah.
hey, this happened. This is somebody saying it happened.
Yeah.
Now we still need to verify what the system says is good, and that any issues that maybe need to be remediated
Mhm.
are remediated,
Yeah.
but at least the system generated
You're
the
not putting your
evidence.
trust in a single individual, you're putting your trust in a system, which generally proves more reliable.
Well, it's a computer. It
Computers are
generates it
reliable. They generally
generally.
do what
Yeah.
they are told to do.
Except
So
Windows.